Hello everyone, welcome to our event today. This event is brought to you by DataTalks.Club, which is a community of people who love data. We have weekly events, and this event is one of such events. So if you want to find out more about the events we have, go to the description, there is a link, click on this and you'll see all the events we have. By the way, this is still old logo, we have a new logo. So yeah, I need to update this screenshot. So go check out our events. Then if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, now it's the best time to do this. Just go below the video and then there is this subscribe button, click on that and you'll get notified about all our videos. And then finally, the most important thing, we have an amazing Slack community. There is a link in the description. Click on this link, register in our Slack, and you'll get to hang out with a lot of amazing people. During today's interview, you can ask any question you want. There is a pinned link in the live chat. Click on this link and ask your questions, and I'll be covering these questions during today's interview. So that's all. So now what I want to do is I want to make the tweet I was talking about. So the tweet is there, and I want to open the questions. Did you like the questions?
Sorry?
Did you like the questions?
Yeah, I did. Actually, yeah, when I read the questions, I was like, oh, wow, I can answer all of them actually. So I didn't even write the script or anything like that. I just, but yeah, I did because there were quite some of the questions, especially were questions that I do get asked by even my friends, right? Because I'm a recruiter, so things about salaries and what to say, what not to say. So I'm very happy, and I hope I can help people also to navigate this sometimes strange recruitment processes and interviews.
Yeah, so thanks for being here. So this week we'll talk about hiring data professionals, and we have a special guest today, Alicja. Alicja worked for almost 6 years at Zalando as a recruiter with focus on hiring data scientists. I think in Zalando it's called applied scientists. At some point you renamed this, but it was research scientists, data scientists. You had a bunch of data professionals. So I actually met Alicja during recruitment process as well. So she was trying to hire me multiple times. And even though Alicja no longer works at Zalando, and I think maybe you'll tell us a bit more about that. Mm-hmm. You don't focus on data professionals specifically anymore. Mm-hmm. But when I was thinking who to invite to this interview, who to talk to about hiring data professionals, I couldn't think of a better candidate. So welcome to our event.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So before we go into our main topic of hiring data people, let's start with your background. Can you tell us about your career journey so far?
Yeah, so I started over 10 years ago in recruitment, and like most of the people, I kind of fell into it. As I started working in a recruitment agency, very small one, and then I moved on in-house. So I became not a headhunter, but part of an internal recruitment team at Google, where I spent 2 years hiring site reliability engineers, which was quite challenging. And after that, I decided to move to Berlin, and I joined Zalando. I first joined actually as a sourcer, then I became this recruiter. And the last couple of years, I was also leading a team of recruiters who were recruiting data professionals and also product designers. So that was my journey so far.
And what do you do now?
Yeah, and right now I am part of We Are King, which is an embedded talent agency. So I kind of went to the other side. What we do is we go into companies, we help them scale their tech teams, kind of embedded. So, do the usual things the internal team would do. And yeah, we do this in Berlin as well as in Amsterdam, but really operating globally these days. So with remote work, yeah.
So not just data folks, but any tech professionals.
Tech focused at the moment, yeah. So I'm kind of in a role of a client lead, also where it's a bit more on a strategic level, doing project management and helping and advising, consulting different companies and clients. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks. So probably we'll be talking more about the work you were doing at Zalando, but I guess the process looks similar. Not just for data folks, but for usual tech professionals as well. So I'm curious, What does the hiring process look like? What are the typical steps in the process?
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of the times, of course, the process overall will depend on the company. But typically what I see, especially in tech and for data science, there is some sort of recruiter interview, usually as a first one. Not always, but typically. And then there is a technical screening, like usually one interview, 1 hour long with a data science interviewer. So that's much more technical. And then there is like a final round of used to be physical on-site interviews that were actually, that's why we call them on-sites, but now they're mostly virtual due to the current situation. And in that final round, typically it again depends on the company. It could be anything from 3 or 2 to 5 or 7 interviews. So again, depends on the company and how big they are also. Then sometimes this process may not be as organized or as structured. But yeah, after that, obviously there is the decision round, and then yeah, final kind of decision.
Mm-hmm. And I guess even before that, the process also involves sourcing candidates or doing CV screening, right? So this is the process.
Oh yes,
starts, right?
of course. So like when I talked about process, I guess I just kind of explained the recruitment or like interviewing process. But of course, before that we even get into that stage, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen beforehand. So first, of course, we need to have candidates who are willing to go for those interviews, and that, especially when it comes to data professionals, that could take a while. And then, of course, after the interviews, there is another stage where decision is made, and if the decision is positive, like we want to hire someone. We need to make an offer. We need to talk about, the conditions and come up with a contract, and then onboard the person. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Quite a lot of work. And
yes.
What do you do in this process? What is your role in this process?
Yeah, so the role starts whenever there is a need. So there's a demand and obviously also the budget to hire someone like a data scientist or data engineer. Typically a hiring manager, so this could be anyone, could be engineering manager, could be a data science manager, but someone in the team who can hire and who wants to hire would contact the recruitment team or myself directly and say like, I want to hire a data scientist, can you help me? So that's where it starts, and this is where we kind of have an initial meeting with that person to establish what they're really looking for, to come up with the job description, make sure that it's kind of aligned. This is also where there's kind of during this process, I would try to establish, why do we need this person? Why are we hiring externally? And do they really need all of the skills that are mentioned? Because sometimes, there are certain expectations, but they're not always what is available on the market. Talent market is super tough when it comes to hiring data professionals. It's not easy. There's high competition. So it's also a kind of, in a way, negotiation sometimes with the hiring managers, depending on the hiring manager, as to like what realistically is possible and what is not. Going through the job description, making sure it's attractive, that people will actually want to apply to it, and deciding what the interview process will be, who will be the interviewers that will take part, what kind of interviews we have to absolutely do, and which ones maybe we could omit, and if there is flexibility on that, of course. So yeah, very kind of nitty-gritty practicalities as well about everything. At which point the hiring manager will talk to the people who will talk to the candidates. Yeah.
So that's quite a lot of things.
So that's where it starts, yes, and of course, then there is a part where there's twofold. So with hiring data professionals, I think in tech in general, it's very competitive market, but more so from my experience when it comes to data scientists or data engineers. So we do obviously post the positions. Typically, every recruiter would always, post the open position, but the number of applicants or who applies isn't always aligned. And this is where we can't rely on that, because we would probably never hire them. And this is where sourcing comes in. So as a recruiter, a lot of the recruiters do both. Some companies have separate sourcing teams where there's people who just source candidates and they don't even interview them. But in what I did actually in the beginning of my journey at Zalando was I started as a sourcer for data science, and then I became a recruiter for data science. So it goes down to actually actively approaching candidates or people who wouldn't apply because they don't have to, because they get messages on LinkedIn and they may be happy in their jobs and they don't even think about applying. So this is where sourcing is often a big part when it comes to hiring data professionals. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but do let me know.
The question was what's you do there, and I think it's only a part of you only partly answered, because I think there's more, right?
Yes. So it's quite a long journey. So let's say we post a job, we then also at this simultaneously typically we source for candidates, so we start reaching out to them on LinkedIn, but only any other ways that the sourcer can find. You might have experienced this yourself. Sometimes even Facebook, Twitter, Reddit. I mean, there's so many, GitHub, maybe not so much for data professionals, more so for software engineers, but any ways we can find and get in touch with people we think are right. That's what we would do. So we, in Reddit, a lot of work.
Even Reddit, right?
I personally haven't done that, to be honest. But I know some sourcers who really like kind of quite geeky, and they like to come up with new ways. So I'm not sure how they do this. But
so if you want to get hired, go to Reddit and post stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, many different ways. Also, like looking at university alumni. So especially for data professionals, if we are looking for people who need to have certain level, like PhDs, looking at the alumni of universities, looking at conferences. So when I sourced for data science, I looked at that a lot. The machine learning conferences and the papers that were submitted. So sourcing is a big part, and it takes a while. It's a long-term also kind of strategy of trying to hire data professionals, and this then also comes along with partnering with the hiring manager. So at this point, depends on the sourcer. Like if there is someone who's just starting as a sourcer or not yet fully understands what they are looking for, because we recruiters are not technical people. We don't have computer science degrees. It takes also for us a while to understand what is the right profile. So then we typically partner with the hiring manager or interviewers or people in the team or other data scientists within the company to understand, are those the right type of profiles, those who apply and the ones I reach out to. And then hopefully we do have some candidates and we, put them through the process. So I would start with the recruiter interview, spend some time discussing people's motivations and also practicalities of, what they would be looking for, and then we go through the stages. So as a recruiter, I would take that candidate through all the stages. So starting from the recruiter interview, then technical screening, then the on-site interviews, and as we go, providing feedback from those interviews, and then up to the offer, including making them an offer. So that's like kind of end-to-end recruitment, or sometimes we call it 360 recruiters. Because there are recruiters who don't do the whole part as well, but more so, I think more often these days it's just you do everything. So you also then make the offer to the candidate, and I think that's something what also me as a recruiter I enjoyed, right? Like being able to go through this journey with someone, and at the end, make them an offer, and hopefully they accept it, which is even nicer. So making an offer, and then making sure that if they accept it, they also get their contracts. That's a lot
of work. So you mentioned quite a few interesting things that I wanted to ask. So first I wanted to ask about, apart from Reddit, so Reddit thing was quite interesting, but what got my attention is you mentioned that when a hiring manager comes to you saying, I want to hire a data scientist or applied scientist, you first kind of negotiate with them what is realistically possible. So does it often happen when they come with a profile that doesn't exist and you have to manage their expectations?
Yes. That's a part of the challenge. This is also why I actually, particularly, as I said to you when you first reached out to me, that I don't no longer recruit for data science. but it's all very close to my heart because in the very beginning of my career, like as a sourcer at Zalando for data science, at the first 6 months, I think I was not able to make a hire. And for a recruiter, actually, and this is important thing to know when you are a candidate, because to understand that recruiters are there to make hires, which means that actually they are in a way on your side because they want you to sign that contract. So they will do everything possible to make sure, obviously within the ethics of the job, but they we will do anything possible to make sure you sign it and you are happy in your job. So for me, it was like in the first 6 months, I think I didn't make any hires. I wasn't able to find anyone, and this was kind of quite a challenge. So yeah, a big part usually is the expectations that some hiring managers have. I have to say that over time and later on down the line, I was very lucky to have very good hiring managers at Zalando who really understood the market, and like over time we were able to build these relationships with. There was an understanding that if the hiring manager coming to me saying like, I need 3 principal data scientists.
Okay, good luck, right?
That's what I would say. I was like, that's very funny. But I was comfortable to say that, of course, because I knew that they understand that this is not going to happen in the next month. And I would typically say that, yeah, it's going to be minimum 6 to 9 months before we hire the first one. So this is very often the thing. And I think it's not just because, sometimes it's because maybe hiring managers not necessarily have the data science background themselves. It could be that they're engineering managers, so they have software engineering background, but they need to hire data scientists for their teams. And then this is where I would need to, as a recruiter, provide them more advice and give them insights of the market and what are the profiles that are available and what is realistic. And oftentimes they would understand that, and that would be fine. And we would agree on, okay, what are the must-haves and what we can compromise on. So, yeah.
And so you have this information, you can say, okay, finding this kind of experience, like, I don't know, experience with Kubernetes, maybe it's very difficult to find in data science profiles, right? And then if the hiring manager really insists on having this profile, you will need to say that, okay, that it severely reduces the number of candidates you would have for this position. So
with data, obviously.
Okay.
Because I've noticed
the data for that as well.
You have to. I think like as a recruiter, especially in tech recruitment, but especially when dealing with data scientists, I've noticed like this is the thing. You just need to have the data to show them, and that's the easiest way to convince someone. It's not about the feelings or like what my gut feeling, what it is. But yeah, as a resourcer, also like a recruiter, you're able to gather this data. LinkedIn also has the tool like Market Insights, so a lot of recruiters have access to that. Some of us don't. So then you have to be a bit more creative, but you can show them like at least roughly like, okay, this is how the market looks like. So if the more must-haves you add, the more tight or narrow the funnel is, or the available talent, and that helps to drive the conversation.
Interesting. And another thing you mentioned is then you work with the hiring manager to make sure that the position, the job description looks attractive. And how do you do this? Like by carefully picking the words, or how exactly that works?
Yeah, so I think, for me, always it was the case, like I wouldn't write the job description myself because I don't know what specific AI tools or methods in machine learning have to be there and how to word it so it actually makes sense to someone reading it who is a data scientist. So I would always first ask them to draft like a job description. We would have some format that has to be followed, but and then just checking that the wording makes sense. I think it's also about like understanding that not just putting the right buzzwords, because but being able to like really show, I think, what the person will be doing. And I think what I found out when I was going through and sourcing, as well as like working with hiring managers, is that data scientists or data professionals like to know what problems they will be solving, and it's about like they get excited about the problems. So being able to write a job description that focuses on that, this is actually the problem we have right now, and you'll be part of the team who is trying to solve it. That's what gets people's attention and excitement, and not just saying, oh yeah, we have those perks and benefits like free lunches or coffee. Like, yes, it's great, but it's not as exciting. So yeah, in that sense. But
Free
another,
lunches are good as well, I think.
I agree. Yeah. But yeah, when it comes to making a decision to switch jobs, like, yeah, I've noticed
That's not enough, right?
doesn't like flip the scales. Yeah. Another part of actually writing job descriptions, this is something that is maybe more recent, is that there are some tools which are actually AI-driven tools that allow us to go through the job description. So they would go through the job description and tell us like, okay, this is, what kind of audience this job description will attract. And right now, as you might be aware, there is a big conversation about having more inclusion and diversity in tech, especially. And, when it comes to gender diversity, for instance, there are certain tools that are able to tell us like, okay, this job description that you've just written is really speaking loud to men or people who identify as men more so than women. So if you're actually trying to balance out your team a little bit, maybe you should change a few words, and it gives you like an indication of what kind of words you can swap. And yeah, that's actually something that was, that is AI or machine learning driven, which is quite interesting and can be helpful also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. I think I also used this tool. It would say, okay, this phrase, I don't remember the exact examples, but it would say this phrase will appear more to male candidates. If you want to be more inclusive, consider changing it, and then it gives a couple of suggestions.
Yeah, it makes it more neutral. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, so when it comes to sourcing, so you now posted it, so you negotiated the requirements with the hiring manager, you made an attractive job description, now you go live with this description, people start applying, but you also mentioned that it's not enough, you also need to actively reach out to people. Go to Twitter, Reddit, GitHub, or LinkedIn, I guess, obviously, and write people saying, hey, we have this amazing job description, how about having a chat? And so how, in this case, do you select profiles? What does pique your attention here?
So I think, well, typically, to be honest, there's many tools you can go through, but I think LinkedIn is a good starting point usually, because you can at least get an idea of who's available, and it has also quite interesting filters. So I can filter out for years of experience, for instance, or the degree levels, and things like that, and then putting Boolean strings of keywords. So it's quite good in that respect. So that would be like a starting point. Yeah, what I would do is I would look at profiles that match the initial keywords or the job description that I have in front of me, or based on the discussion that I had with the hiring manager the most. So I think, I would first like try to narrow it down, to like whatever is like the ideal case scenario, right? So I know where are those people, who they are, and then verify it with the hiring manager to see like, okay, these are the initial results. Like I haven't reached out to those people, but like, what do you think? Is this profile correct? Because again, like if I'm starting, I might not really know. So what stands out, I think, what I do look at a lot on when looking at LinkedIn and sourcing is the experience itself. But also education. So like I think this is kind of something that has to be balanced when looking for data science people or data professionals. Often the degree, like PhD or at least master's, is like a must. Not always, but that would be something I would look at, as opposed to, for instance, if I was looking for software engineers, that doesn't necessarily wouldn't be the case. But when it comes to data science, yes, often it would be a requirement. So I had to look at what kind of degree it is. Is it computer science? Is it physics? Is it biology? Whatever it is, and to check if this is okay, and balance it also with the amount of experience and what that person did. Not just the years of experience, but what they write in their responsibility. So like, I think the worst scenario for a sourcer is like having a LinkedIn profile of someone which is like a skeleton profile, where there is just like a company they work for and the title, but nothing in the description of the tasks or responsibilities that they do. Or sometimes people just put the description of what the company does. I'm like, I know what this company does. I already researched them. Like, thank you very much. I wish to know what you are actually doing there. Of course, I think some people do it on purpose because maybe they don't want to be contacted by recruiters. I understand that. And then I have to judge if this is kind of something I still want to do or not. But then that also means my message to that person is not going to be very personal because I really don't know. So it's more like a stab in the dark. But yeah, looking at the exact responsibilities, what this person did themselves, not just like the team, what the team was focusing on, but themselves. Did they build those machine learning algorithms and models from scratch, or not? And you know, and then combining that with looking at the degree, and obviously the keywords. Yes, as a recruiter, you know, that's what I can rely on. Like really those things. I don't like my data points are. I can't read a paper that someone wrote for their PhD and understand it. Often I don't. Sometimes maybe like the summary in the beginning, but you know, like very vaguely. So yeah, there's very few things and not always getting it right.
Do you remember what kind of keywords you were putting there? Like, let's say if you were to look for a data scientist right now, what kind of keywords you would put in the search tool?
Yeah, machine learning or AI or data science. Well, not data science. I would say machine learning or AI or ML, and then or at some actually no. Yes, and I'll continue with my string in terms of ors like deep learning or a few other like known, maybe or a bit more popular algorithms, but that also then depends on the job description, because if we're looking for a computer vision specialist, for instance, with deep learning skills, then yes, those I would put, but maybe I wouldn't put you know, some other mathematical models and things in there. So, but
I would take this from the job description, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that would be my starting point. Like the must-haves. What are the 3 or 4 like must-haves, and I would just put it in the string. So sometimes it would give a very broad pool, but then I would narrow it down with the degrees and the level of experience. Yeah.
And how important do you think is having a master's degree? So let's say somebody has only a bachelor degree, a level of education, or maybe they don't have any degree at all. How important it is?
I'm not really sure if there's that much difference between bachelor's and master's. I feel like there was always been more distinction if there was a requirement coming from the hiring managers about like, do they need to have a PhD or not? Mm-hmm. And if it was not, then it wasn't specifically like, oh, that means they have to have masters. It was more like it could be bachelor's or master's. Mm-hmm. But I think this distinction between masters and PhD, sometimes that is important. So sometimes it was really a must, but then it was, for instance, for a team that was very research heavy team, where maybe they weren't working on specific product, that there was a research lab, for instance, and within Zalando, but they didn't work on a specific product and delivering that. But they needed to have a PhD and papers. That was the point of the team, let's say, in a very high level from recruiter perspective. And I don't want to like undermine that, but yeah. But then for other teams that maybe, they didn't really need that. Like we don't need people who have PhDs or even masters. We do want them to, of course, have solid education in terms of like they understand the maths behind some of the tools they are using and algorithms, but they don't have to have masters. That was often also a thing or something we discussed. Yeah.
Okay. And also I prepared a couple of questions about CV screening, and I think we covered that partly because I assume the process for you of looking at LinkedIn profile is similar to looking at a CV that you get when somebody applies. Is it similar? You mentioned for a LinkedIn profile, you look for exact responsibilities, what exactly the person did. Right, I think this is still important for a CV. Right, what else is important for a CV? How do you look at a CV of an applicant to decide if you want to continue talking with this candidate or you want to not continue?
Yeah, I think CV is slightly only different in the sense that in LinkedIn there is a certain format. So typically you would see the experience and the role responsibilities first, after of course the name and the picture. And in the CV, sometimes I notice like people would put maybe their education first. So like for me, I think the experience working for like an in-house recruiter for a company that needed typically mostly senior people, meaning senior not in terms of age, of course, but level, like they experience, let's put it that way, maybe that's a better word. Then that would be the first thing I would look at. And then secondly, at the education. So my advice actually here is like, of course, it depends. If you are like a recent graduate who doesn't have much experience, maybe it is better to put the education to highlight that as a first point. But I think experience typically beats most of that. Even if it's just 6 months internship, I would already like put that on top of the CV, because that's where, you know, I would look at. But yeah, it's very similar. So it's like looking at the experience and the education. And again, with the CVs, I would often also see that there will be title and there will be a list of responsibilities, but it will be very vague. Or sometimes people put like a list of tools, but it's just like a list of tools. And I'm not really sure, like, what did they do with them? Like, how often did they work with them? I have no clue. Like, and sometimes I see also on CVs, and maybe not so much on LinkedIn, but that could also be the case, that people do put a lot of those buzzwords. And that can be very confusing. It used to be very confusing for me, because then I was like, okay, well, this person mentions all of the things that I have in a job description, so it looks fine. But then would turn out actually they wouldn't be able to pass the first interview. And it was like, okay, like, did I do something wrong? Maybe I should have explained. But I was also lucky enough to have a lot of really like I built some network within Zalando of data scientists who are very, very helpful. I remember specifically Mikio Brown, who I think was on your podcast some time ago. He would sit with me in my very first year, I think, as a sourcer, every week, I think for an hour, maybe even, just screening the CVs, because like I had no clue what I was doing. I was like, look, like it's soon gonna be 6 months. I'm not sure if I'm gonna pass my probation here because I haven't made any hires. So like, so that was very helpful as well for me to see like how he looks at the CVs from the perspective of someone who actually does the job. And that was very helpful, because then I learned to read between the lines, or learn to read beyond just someone putting the buzzwords, because sometimes people would put the buzzwords, but there would be nothing else, or they could be the opposite. They wouldn't actually really showcase and highlight what they did, and then you could miss out, because maybe you will get rejected just because you didn't put something in your CV. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what can people do to make their CVs more attractive? So first thing you said, you should move education down and prioritize work experience. What else can candidates do to be more successful at this stage?
Be very clear about the responsibilities and what you did in your current job and your previous jobs, as opposed to what the team did. Of course, I don't mean like if there was don't give credit to the team, and don't own up to things that you didn't do on your own. But I think do highlight like what was your part in that team effort, because that's, at the end of the day, that's also like, what we need to know. And that really helps a lot. And it helps a lot also with driving further interviews and for the interviewers further down the line, because then they can ask you more informed questions and avoid asking you questions that are totally irrelevant, which you probably be also confused about. So yeah, be very specific about your tasks and responsibilities, what you accomplished, like the things you did. And if that was part of the team effort, of course, also mention that. But this is important more so than the title, I think, because title's so confusing. And this was also big part of confusion when I started as a data science sourcer 6 years ago. The title was could mean anything. Data scientist was it could be anyone. But yeah,
not many things changed since then.
I was hoping. I thought it was got a little bit better.
Converging a little bit, but still, it's not always. You really have to look into the responsibilities to understand. Okay, this is the kind of data scientist you mean.
So responsibilities. Just to answer your question shortly, because I don't want to of course go over time, but responsibilities, being very clear also at the month and the year, not just year to year, because that could be a year 12 months difference sometimes. But practical things like making sure there is no typos, but I think that's kind of quite obvious. If I could offer my opinion, which is like opinion, not necessarily, or my preference, but I do have a lot of recruiting colleagues who also do mention that there is this Europass format of CVs. It's horrible. Very, very difficult to read. I have no idea where is what. And I think it's like EU somehow, I'm not sure, but yeah, it's something I would avoid. And one thing I do want to also mention to avoid, because I know in Germany in particular, it's a kind of more of a, I guess, tradition that you put your photo on the CV. In some countries, not just Germany, I've seen this, that you add your photo. And I know that in some more traditional companies, this is required. So you actually have to add your photo. But what I see, like the trends I see now, and like what I think is more beneficial to people applying is to not attach the photo and don't put your date of birth. Things like that. This is because we are all biased and it's unconscious bias. So I'm not like, intentionally, but like when you see a photo first, you might have immediately you start forming assumptions in your brain without knowing it. And that also helps you then as a candidate to reduce that bias and hopefully, be more successful. So I would say, of course, you have to judge for yourself. As I said, for some companies, they will require that, and that's fine. But I think for a lot of maybe smaller companies, startups, or like tech companies, I would avoid adding your photo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. And so now you look at the CV, you decide to move forward with a candidate, and the next step is an interview with a recruiter with you, right? So how does it look like? What do you talk about there?
Yeah. I mean, my interviews, I think, were quite short. So but every recruiter does it differently. But typically, recruiters are not going to ask technical questions. We can't. We did try at some point in the very beginning at Zalando to come up with very like short and screening questions on like very like basics of machine learning that I could ask and verify the answer, like kind of ABC answer, and everyone was passing them. So I decided like this doesn't make any sense. So my focus would be on the soft skills, so-called soft skills. So more about what the person has been doing. Sometimes there are some things in the CV, like gaps in the CV that I would like to clarify. Or if the CV isn't super like, it's a bit more generic, then I would ask like, what were actually your responsibilities and accomplishments in your current or previous jobs? If the PhD is important, like what was it about? And I would sometimes ask, like, can you explain it to me, someone who is not technical? Because for data scientists, I think maybe not so much for less experience, but for the more kind of senior, sometimes that's also part. It's not just about the technical ability and skills. It's also about being able to explain those complex concepts to people who have no idea about machine learning, to be able to convince them sometimes that, this is not a realistic solution that you have in mind and we can't do that. So I would like test it on myself. So like, can you explain to me what you did in your PhD in words that, I can understand? And that I really liked because I also learned quite a lot, and I learned actually to really like data science and talking to people who do that, because it's really fascinating. But yeah, I would ask questions, typically like behavioral questions as well. So if you can give me an example of a situation when you had to work with a difficult stakeholder, why was it difficult? And this, I think, could be difficult because I would see like a lot of people answer in a very general or hypothetical scenarios. So it's more about, okay, try to answer in a, like, give me an actual example from the past and walk me through like your, actions and what did you do in that situation specifically and what was the outcome. So yeah, these are called like behavior questions because we want to check for the behaviors. We want to see if the person will fit with the culture of the company and the values that the company has. So that's why we ask them. Yeah. And then the practical questions at the end, I typically ask about your notice period, if you're currently employed. So like how soon you could start if you, decided to join us. And then obviously salary. So what are your expectations? And also, how actively you are interviewing with your current, currently, because even if that would be the thing, like I might be sourcing people who are passive, but then so are 15 other recruiters and sources from other companies. And you end up, sometimes I speak to them in the very beginning of the process, but at the end, they already have other offers on the table. So I wanted to verify it in the very beginning, like how advanced you are in those stages, because there is still a process to happen. So how much time we have left. So those will be like practical questions.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to salary expectation questions, I heard this advice. Mm-hmm. The advice is never tell the number first. So when somebody asks you, like let's say I'm a data scientist, you're a recruiter, we are having this initial screening, and you ask me, what are your salary expectations? And if I follow this advice, then I would say, no, I will not tell you. Tell me what is the salary range. And then the recruiter would say, but we want to base, and then, they start this ping pong. Yes. So what do you think about this advice? Like, is it good advice? Should people follow this?
It depends. But what I would do before answering this, so like first I would actually say, it can be super helpful to know the expectations. So I would still ask this, but I would say don't necessarily say what your current salary is. And this is something I follow myself. So when I was interviewing recently for a new job, I made it a point of, not answering that question. And it's absolutely fine not to say what your current salary is. And it's no one's business. Also, like your future employer, I think in most of European countries, at least, won't be able to check. And if you say some number and it's not true, like they won't be able to check that, and they shouldn't. It's personal data. So ignore that question, or just like say, look, I'm just something that I'm willing to share. And I because sometimes recruiters are told that this is the question you have to ask, and they will ask you this, but just know you don't have to answer that. When it comes to the expectations, though, that's a bit more tricky, because we want to know if this is like, if your expectations are totally off, and I mean by that like 20,000 off in terms of like the annual number, then probably we shouldn't be wasting your time, right? And the recruiter or the company's time. And this is tricky, and it depends, because it depends on the company. So I know that there are some companies, and I speak to candidates every day, there are some companies that how the structure internally is based is that if you interview them, it depends on how good you are at negotiating. So if you're not good at negotiating, you will get whatever you ask for in the beginning, and that's it. And someone told me, like, yeah, they gave me the salary, and I learned later that my colleague in the same level earns this amount more. And when I told this to them, they were like, well, yeah, you should have negotiated better. And some companies will still do that. I think typically maybe smaller companies. So that's why it's good to actually ask, how does your salary structure works? How does the leveling and structure work in this company before I answer this question? Because if it is the type of company where they just like, it all depends on how well you interview and, what you ask for, then yeah, don't tell them your expectations. Like I'll be honest, don't. But in a lot of companies, like the bigger ones, there is leveling, and that means that also to that level, to every level, whether it's junior, mid-level, senior, and above, there is attached a band. And that means that often, like I say this actually to candidates right away. I'm like, no matter what you're going to say, even if the number is very low, I will tell you what our band is. But just so you know, just because you ask for a lower amount, we're not going to give you that amount. We will still put you on that range if we feel like you are truly a senior or a mid-level. Because, yeah, it will be very unfair. And I think a lot of companies try to avoid that because it is unfair, because it leads to, a lot of weird, atmosphere between team members. Not a good thing that later on down the line in long term. So, yeah, if it's a company that has established ranges and also leveling, and then I think it's okay for you to share, and you don't have to actually say a specific number. You can give them a range, and that's already sometimes good enough. And also what you can say is that this is my initial estimate, what I want, but this may change because I'm interviewing with 2 other companies or this company, and I will also do my research. This is sometimes what people also tell me. They say like, okay, well, I thought about this number, but actually, 2 weeks later, they maybe got an offer that's higher than this, and now it's changed. And that's also fine. Like, this is life, right? So as a recruiter, we learn, like we expect that. We expect that, this is not set in stone. I'm not going to hold you to this at the end and like a month later turn on and say like, oh, but you said this and this is wrong. Well, I mean, in the data science recruitment market, it would be weird for me to expect that, people will not have other offers. I mean, of course, it depends. Sometimes if you're just a graduate, you probably, it's harder to find a job, but people change their minds and expectations change, and that's fine as long as you're open about it from the beginning. So say that in the beginning that this may change, and keep the recruiter posted. That's all we want, just so you let us know, so we can counteract and try to still maybe do something about it. Yeah.
And Tia, you mentioned if I let's say I'm having this conversation with the recruiter and then I give a number that is quite high, and then we see, okay, there is no way we can match this ask with what we have. But maybe the reason I told this high number is because I have no idea how much to ask, and then I just, pick a random big number and then say it. So what are the dangers here? So the danger is one, the company might decide not to continue, right?
Yeah, so if someone did that, so they gave me a number, it was very high, I would ask them, okay, can I ask you, what did you base it on? Because sometimes people, as you said, they have no clue, they just throw a number. But sometimes people go on Glassdoor. So Glassdoor also allows you to see salaries of people from the same company you are interviewing it. There are a few other tools. Some candidates recently sent me where you can check salaries globally for many different companies, and from there you can already gather some sort of a range. But yeah, sometimes people base it on essentially the fact that they see salaries being posted on Glassdoor or other sources, and that's a bit more informed. But yeah, if it's just stab in the dark and it's very high, I would ask them oh, is it based on other offers that you already received before, or is it based on just anything? I would still try to somehow figure out if we can move forward, because as I said, as a recruiter, I really want to hire people. But if someone says no, this is a must and I'm not, that's it, then yeah, the danger is that we would just have to say, okay, then I guess it doesn't make sense to move forward with the process. But I have to say, yeah, if it's a very, very big gap, but I don't even come across, to be honest, these days very often with people having a very wide expectations, very, very big gap. Usually sometimes it could be maybe a couple of thousand in a kind of annual amount, and then sometimes it could be outside of the range for that level, but that could mean that, okay, maybe we can discuss with the hiring manager and find another way to compensate for that. There are those ways, and I think every recruiter would try if it's possible, but if they tell you it's not, then it's probably true.
Okay, thank you. I see that we have quite a few questions, so I think it's time we try to cover them. So the first question from Amen is how can career changers get in the eye of a recruiter? So what would be your advice to people who are changing their careers? Let's say they want to get to Zalando or some other company you're hiring for. So what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I think this is quite tough also, because I know that a lot of companies want people to have specific degree, even if it's bachelor's, but from a university and in computer science. And then if you come from a different background and you're changing careers from something very not even tech related, it's really challenging. And I did see a lot of people actually also do that. So do some of the courses on Coursera and then try to swap. But I think it is very difficult, because there is experience is what matters the most. And unfortunately, yeah, that's difficult. I would say try to gather experience, even if it's as I said, an internship, apprenticeship, unpaid. And this is, again, this is something that is, I hope will change. But for many people, it's not easy to just, do an internship that is unpaid for 6 months because you have bills to pay. so that's a difficulty that I totally understand. But I that's, if I can give advice, another advice I would give though is try to network as much as possible with people who are data scientists in those companies, whether it's meetups, or any kind of communities you can find, but also do connect with recruiters on LinkedIn, because there's a lot of recruiters who are in-house recruiters, and maybe they work for those companies, but the companies are not really willing to look at people who career changers. But then there are also headhunters from recruitment agencies who maybe, they typically work with many different clients, actually. So they will work with many different companies, and then they kind of have a wider net, and they know maybe there are some opportunities somewhere. So the more recruiters you also connect with, the better. And then, of course, making sure your LinkedIn profile is kind of as clear as possible, and you list everything, and any kind of practical experience you had is there, and explained kind of clearly what you did during that. But yeah, it's a tough thing, because I think there's a lot of, especially when it comes to data science hiring, I've seen a lot of the hiring managers saying that we need people with 5 years of experience at least, and it has to be from like a similar company, working on a product, in a product team. It's not something like, sometimes not realistic.
Yeah, thanks. What do you think about the importance of cover letter? So there's a question from Alma, is how important do you think, in your opinion, to have a cover letter in Berlin? Or it should be more like based on CV, and CV is more important than a cover letter?
I think if the cover letter is like obligatory during this application process, and sometimes it will be, then of course it's important, and that means that a recruiter or hiring managers or both read it. I would say a lot of the times I wouldn't read them because I just didn't have time. And I think a lot of recruiters are in this position, to be honest. But some of my hiring managers did. So sometimes, like they would mention, oh, this person mentioned that in the cover letter. I'd be like, oh, okay. But I would say it's not, I don't find it very important unless, again, it's an entry-level position. So if you are a graduate and there is a junior or level data scientist position, then typically cover letters would be something that the recruitment team would look at, because you probably don't have that much experience to put in your CV. So they want to understand your motivations a bit more. But if it's a more like seasoned or more senior experienced level positions, then unless it's necessary, like it says like there is a star and that this is like mandatory, I wouldn't put it.
I must confess, as a hiring manager, I often take part as an interviewer or as a hiring manager in interviews. I also don't look at cover letters, to be honest.
Yep.
So because I assume maybe a recruiter took a look, and sometimes I also try to avoid looking at CV, not to bias myself. So before the interview, I just talk to a candidate, and then after the interview, I look at the CV, because I assume that already the CV screening happened by the recruiter or by somebody, and then I try not to look at the CV as well. But
that's a good one. Yeah, because as I said earlier, right, about the photo, for instance, but there's so many other things people put on the CVs, and like you can really sometimes bias you without you even knowing. So, if you kind of already this person maybe was screened by a recruiter and you trust them and you know that this is probably the right candidate to talk to, then I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, but probably for a recruiter it's not the best way of dealing with CV screening, right?
Unless I mean, if we need your help. So like if it was like I would be on the fence about some profiles still, and then I would ask the hiring manager. So then, I would ask you probably like, can you please look at the CV? But I think if it's like, if I'm kind of quite confident and calibrated as a recruiter already, and, I kind of know, okay, this candidate looks like good, then I think it would be fine that you don't look. And I think it's, again, a way to try to reduce bias a little bit, which I think is good.
Do you also need to hire data analyst profiles?
I haven't myself, but this was like at Zalando, at least at the time when I was there. It was a separate job family, but I do see that this is also becoming quite challenging. And I hear a lot of my colleagues and recruiters I work with, who mentioned that it's sometimes really a struggle to find them as well. So
there is a question from Amin is do you have any tips for those who are looking for data analyst jobs?
No, I don't think so. I mean, because again, it's like kind of like with data science title we discussed, sometimes data analyst can be also a little bit confusing from one company to another, because it could be even that there is no data scientist title, but actually data analysts do what data scientists would do in other companies. So I think it would really like depend on the job description that you see. Yeah, I think I probably don't have that much information about that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, recruiting wise, probably it's very similar, except the screening phase. Maybe you would look for different kind of keywords, different kind of maybe responsibilities, but the rest of the process, I assume, would follow a similar, at least from the point of view of a recruiter, would follow similar steps, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And what about somebody having two bachelor degrees? So, for example, one in IT and one in account management. Do you think it's a good thing? Would it stand out? Would it make candidates stand out or not?
I think it would be interesting, but I'm not sure if it would be something that will kind of weigh the scales. Like, I think it's important that there is a technical, like that kind of technical degree, whether it's computer science or related to machine learning, is probably something I would look out for more. But yeah, if there is also at the same time another bachelor's degree in non-technical field, that's usually something interesting. Like I would look at it, but it wouldn't kind of weigh the scales in one way or the other, I think.
So it will, interesting, but not more than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it could be a good thing, especially like depends again on the role, to be honest, because it could, but then it just really is a bunch of assumptions, right? Like, so if someone says account management experience, I may think like, oh, like maybe they're good at, presenting and, soft skills like managing stakeholders. But then that's just an assumption. So then I'm not sure. I think I haven't been particularly paying attention to that. I have to be honest.
Okay, there is a question from Radu. What is the most difficult part of hiring a data professional?
I think it's how for me it was in the very beginning it was the ambiguity about the titles. It seemed like, and I heard it from everyone. So the biggest difficulty was like there was this suddenly the data science title just exploded and just became like a thing, and everyone was putting that on their CVs, or at least it seemed to me on their profiles. Everyone wanted to do AI or wanted to do deep learning, and like they would just put it everywhere. And then the companies would also want to say that they are AI driven and they use data like deep learning and machine learning. So they would hire data scientists and hire people and give them data scientist title. And then I would hear from people, I would interview, like I was given this title, but I actually am a business analyst, really. Like I have nothing to do with my degree, which was in deep learning, and that's why they would want to move. So there was a lot of confusion. And then my difficulty was like, how do I know if someone is really worked as a data scientist in terms of like what the current company I work for thinks about that? And then also having to explain to them, like especially source candidates, like, so like I remember we would go to like neural information processing conference with Zalando, and a lot of people would come to our booth, and it was me and my colleague from employer branding, non-data scientist people. And it's like, why are you here? Like, what does Zalando do like with AI? And then, people will be very suspicious, and also candidates, because they had those bad experiences with companies telling them, yes, you will be doing deep learning, and then they didn't. So I had to really become very good at explaining, like, yes, this is what we use it, and these are the problems you will actually be solving. And so this whole ambiguity between the disconnect between like the title and what it really means, that was the biggest hurdle. And the second one was that there is a lot of competition. So like when people do what, the right type of people that we wanted to hire would have many, many offers. Weekly, they would get bombarded with messages. And it was about how to convince them to join that particular company. And it was so competitive that typically it will always have like, 2 or 3 other offers on the table with, all different perks. So that's the second one, I think. It's quite scarce talent, I would say.
Do you have time for a couple of more questions?
Yep.
Yeah, I should have started with questions more. I realized that there is a pile of them, so apologies for not starting.
No worries. Happy to answer.
Yeah, so do recruiters consider portfolio projects from courses like, I don't know, courses from Coursera? Do like when you look at CVs and you look at projects, do you think, okay, this person got a project from a Coursera course? Do you think it's a good thing or not?
Depends on the hiring manager. I think for some of them, it would be like, it's nice, but again, like with the double bachelors, it would still be about the experience that they did specifically with the specific methods or tools and how they implemented them and then the experience itself. So I have seen a lot of people, especially doing the Coursera course of Andrew NG, I think. I see it on a lot of the CVs, it wouldn't. I think maybe if it adds value for the person and it helps them, even if it is to actually, do the technical interviews sometimes and refresh your knowledge also, then that's great. But it was not something that would, again, it is more like a nice to have.
Okay,
Yeah.
So that will be certainly helpful for the person to pass the interview, because
it might be
very likely that, at least I remember the questions I got during the interview at Zalanda, some of these questions were covered in that course. So I also took that course, and that course was quite useful for passing the interview. Exactly. So, but as a thing on your CV, maybe it's not the most important thing recruiters care about, right?
No, unless it's really specifically said like, oh, actually someone has it. It's just never happened to me. So I don't want to speak for like everyone or every company, because I think there are some companies maybe that are more open to that, which is great then, and then definitely put it. And I think in general, just do put it on your CV. It's something you accomplished and something you did from beginning to end. That also says something like, committing to doing that and putting in those hours. That's in itself, I think, also something like a value added. So yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, let's take the last one. So the question from Radu is, what advice would you give to data professionals to make a good impression on recruiters?
It's not that difficult. No, just kidding. I think, I don't know, I particularly enjoyed recruiting and interviewing data professionals after I got to know them, and I think that was again like through Zalando, I managed to like get to know a lot of people and understand, the things they are excited about and things that excite them. So if you like want to impress a recruiter, I think try to answer the questions like as much as possible, and like try to think about like you're speaking to someone who doesn't understand anything probably, and I don't want to like this talk badly about recruiters. A lot of us do try to understand machine learning, and we can sometimes tell the difference, but just like try to explain as much as possible in words that that are maybe not as technical, but also like, having that in mind, knowing that speaking to someone who's not a technical person. So sometimes, I would speak to someone and I would ask a question that would be more open-ended questions, but they would answer with yes or no. And that's kind of, okay, I really need to know a little bit more to understand, like, your motivation, or like why, you're doing this or what you did. And so coming prepared for the interview, and that doesn't necessarily mean like knowing everything about the company you are interviewing it at, but prepared, like, having some specific examples, as I said, about the behavior questions. They typically not very varied. They're usually about similar values. The companies, want kind of, someone who's a team player. So the questions would be around that. Or if you were more in a senior role and leadership, like, how you led the team, how big was it? And like, can you give me an example of, how would you grow someone? So try to, ahead of that, try to think about, like, the interviewer will probably ask you questions with for specific examples. So try to come up with specific examples as opposed to hypothetical scenarios. Like, what would I do if I was in this situation? I think that's the kind of like a wishful thinking. So like, yeah. But also come up with questions. And like, I mean, like if you're really, I mean, if you're really, of course, motivated and you're actually interested in joining the company that recruiter is representing, then ask questions about the company or the culture, because sometimes it could mean like if someone is not really asking those questions, I would sometimes wonder like, are they really interested in this company? Maybe they're just interviewing with two other and that's what they're waiting for. And this is kind of like, oh, okay, well, I do it because why not? And another thing is, I think it's also about the commitment. So sometimes if things change, of course, and as I said, also about the salary expectations, things change. But I think just explain. So if you like, it's about like I guess respecting people's time, and I know like recruiters also can be quite difficult about that or not very good with that. So I understand that there are some recruiters who don't really keep you posted. They don't say what happened. You never hear from them after you were rejected. But if you like interviewing with many companies and some company makes you an offer and you like let the recruiter as soon as possible know that actually I don't want to interview with you anymore because I got this offer, and that's fine. So you're not wasting their time. And be open about that yes, I am interviewing. Like we are expecting that you will be interviewing with other companies. Like I'm not gonna be offended that, oh no, like this person also is interviewing there, that's bad. I think, and then with the offers, I think once you accept an offer verbally with a given company, to me that's like, okay, that's like, it's not of course legally binding, even though actually if we make an offer to you in most of European countries it is legally binding, but I would expect then that you will honor that, and that's something, that's your commitment. But I did have sometimes instances when people would accept the offer or even sign the contract and then a week later say like, oh, I got this other offer now, can we negotiate this whole thing again because I got more money or something else happened? And that to me is a kind of, that was a bit like makes you wonder if the person really wants to be here. It's totally fine if you get more money from another company and you want to join them, just don't accept the offer before that. So different situations, but at least communicate as much as possible and explain the kind of the situation. I think that's what I would do.
Yeah, thanks for the advice. How can people find you?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay, so just put your name and you will be there. Okay, so thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for sharing these stories, these tips. I also apologize that we didn't cover all the questions. So if you wanted your question to be answered, you can go to our Slack and ask these questions in our careers channel. So you can do that, and there are a lot of people who can also answer them. So thanks a lot again for joining us, and thanks everyone for joining us today and asking questions. Thanks for taking part in the discussion, and I wish everyone a great weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.